At 7:00 a.m., the HOA president was on my dock, shouting about how my unauthorized boat was destroying the community lake. All while she was, in fact, trespassing on my private property to menace me with legal action concerning my own water. The stiletto heels of Karen Whitmore impaled the cedar boards I had stained myself last summer as she brandished a cease and desist letter as if it were a weapon. This rust bucket is gone by Friday, sterling, otherwise. I'm contacting my attorney and the sheriff. That's $200 a day in fines. Additionally, we'll be placing a lien on this hovel you refer to as a home. The aroma of diesel from my restored '87 Chris Craft mingled with her cloyingly sweet perfume as she pointed a blood-red nail at my pride and joy. The part she was unaware of was that the community lake she was yelling about, all 47 acres of it, down to the last drop, belonged to me. But this is the nature of bullies. They invariably reveal the exact method of their own downfall, so I simply smiled, took a sip of my coffee, and allowed Karen to dig her own professional grave. How would you react if someone attempted to seize your property right before your eyes? Let me know in the comments, where are you tuning in from? And what is your most dreadful HOA story? Allow me to rewind 18 months to the beginning of this whole ordeal. I am Marcus Sterling, age 52. After a 25-year career in Army logistics, I wisely chose to retire to the mountains. My uncle Theodore had bequeathed to me this small cabin on what I assumed was merely another scenic lake in Colorado. The old man had always been the family's eccentric, living a reclusive life but somehow having money hidden away everywhere. The cabin itself was not much to behold. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, and a kitchen straight out of the 1970s. But the view was incredible. Sitting on the back porch with my morning coffee, observing the mist descend from the perfectly calm water as loons exchanged calls. That is the sound of tranquility after decades spent in the chaos of the military. The lake has the shape of a teardrop. 47 acres of immaculate mountain water, encircled by 12 unpretentious houses, nothing extravagant, just ordinary people seeking peaceful places to retire, or so I believed, until my encounter with Karen Whitmore. Karen took up residence 3 houses away from me about 6 months after I arrived. A white BMW, overly white teeth, and a portfolio of white lies. Her entire demeanor broadcasted the message. I may not fit in here, but I intend to run the place. Regardless, she is 48, works in real estate, and is married to a city council hopeful named Derek. Within 2 weeks of moving in, she was voted in as HOA president. It's remarkable how that occurs when you are the sole individual who actually desires the position. My first warning sign should have been her self-introduction. I was on the dock, tending to my boat's engine. The Chris Craft I had acquired as a derelict wreck and dedicated 3 years to restoring. Each bolt, every strip of mahogany, and all the chrome accents had been meticulously refurbished. She clattered down in those absurd heels, flashed her real estate agent's smile and remarked, "Ah, you're the military fellow. Well, I trust you realize we uphold certain standards in this community." Certain standards. As if that phrase isn't saturated with condescension. The boat quickly became her fixation. It was too large, she claimed, too noisy. It clashed with the aesthetic concept she envisioned for our lakeside community. It didn't matter that half the other docks harbored boats of comparable size. It didn't matter that mine was likely the most stunning vessel on the entire lake. Karen had determined that I was the issue, and Karen was accustomed to getting her way. The scent of her perfume, an expensive fragrance that likely cost more than my monthly food budget, lingered on the dock long after her departure. But when combined with the genuine aroma of cedar shingles warming in the morning sun and the creosote from aged dock pilings, it felt like an intrusion, as though someone had sprayed artificial flowers in a natural garden. That initial violation notice showed up on a Tuesday. It was printed on crisp white paper with an official HOA letterhead and contained enough legalese-style threats to cow anyone who wasn't better informed. Oversized recreational vessel violates community aesthetic standards per Covenant 14, 7b, $200 daily until removed. Here is a key lesson from military training. It instructs you to collect intelligence prior to taking action, so, rather than becoming incensed, I became inquisitive. Who was this woman who believed she could give orders to a retired Army officer on his own land? And, more crucially, what was I unaware of concerning Uncle Theodore's small inheritance that could potentially alter the entire situation? Because if 25 years in logistics taught me anything, It's that the individual with the superior information is usually the one who prevails, and I had a feeling Karen's research wasn't nearly as thorough as she believed. Karen wasted no time in escalating the situation. 3 days following that first violation notice, she convened an emergency HOA meeting. Naturally, she set it for 2 p.m. on a Wednesday, a time when the majority of working individuals could not be present. It was a classic power move. Rig the outcome, manage the story, and win by default. I attended nonetheless, equipped with my small green deployment notebook and a thermos of coffee that smelled far superior to the overpriced perfume already suffusing her immaculate living room. Her home resembled an explosion in a furniture showroom, filled with white leather and glass tables meant to discourage visitors from touching a single thing. She had assembled her typical supporters. 3 retirees who agreed with everything she said, plus Derek, who hovered in a corner like a fretful accountant tallying someone else's funds. "Ladies and gentlemen," Karen started, opening her laptop with the dramatic flair of a prosecutor announcing an indictment for murder. "We are facing a situation that jeopardizes the very essence of our community." It was a PowerPoint presentation, 20 slides dedicated to my boat. I am not exaggerating. She had taken photos of my Chris-craft from peculiar angles, low shots to make it resemble the Titanic, wide shots that somehow made a 30-foot boat seem to fill the entire lake. The woman possessed a certain talent. I'll grant her that. A malevolent talent, but a talent nonetheless. Mr. Sterling's vessel. She articulated the word vessel, as if it were a communicable disease. Surpasses our size limitations and poses unsafe navigational risks. Moreover, the engine's noise disrupts the peaceful ambience of our community in the early morning. I sat there, listening to this Oscar-worthy performance and recording every allegation in my notebook. My old sergeant used to tell me, "Sterling, when someone is digging their own grave, don't take the shovel, just offer them a larger one." After she concluded her elaborate presentation, I politely raised my hand. "Ma'am, I admire the presentation, it's of professional caliber, but I do have a few questions." Her real estate agent's smile grew taut, like a guitar string on the verge of snapping. "Could you please specify these size restrictions? I've reviewed our covenants twice, as a matter of fact, and I am unable to locate any specific limits on boat length." I leafed through my copy, where every pertinent section was tabbed with neat military precision. "Well," Karen's voice rose in pitch, "it's certainly implied in the aesthetic standards clause." Implied? How interesting. I jotted down a note, the sound of the pen scratching loudly in the abrupt silence. Second question. Derek owns 2 jet skis in addition to that cigarette boat. What is their total length combined? Because from my dock, they appear to be roughly the same size as my single vessel. The sound of Derek swallowing was audible from the other side of the room, but this is where my 25 years of experience with military bureaucracy proved invaluable. I also spent the morning at City Hall, and bureaucrats are quite fond of assisting veterans in navigating regulations. Incidentally, I made a fascinating discovery at the permit office today concerning Derek's dock extension. There is no application on record. That is actually a violation of municipal code that requires immediate correction. It's funny how these matters unfold. Karen's mouth flapped open and closed like a bass gasping for air in a boat well. "How dare you conduct an investigation? I'm just following your example on community standards. Ma'am, due diligence and fair enforcement." The sound of crunching gravel cut short her sputtering as Betty Jamie's vintage Buick signaled the arrival of reinforcements. Betty, 73, had been a high school English teacher for 4 decades and could dissect a teenager's argument with surgical skill. Karen was completely outmatched. "My apologies for being late, dear," Betty said, bustling in with a plate of homemade snickerdoodles that made Karen's store-bought cookies seem like cardboard discs. I was admiring Marcus's boat. It's reminiscent of the classics, from a time when things were built to endure, not just to show off. Then Betty leaned in, whispering just loudly enough for the whole room to hear. "Theodore kept boxes of old documents in that basement. Legal papers, surveys, all sorts of intriguing history. It might be worth a look sometime. I've played poker with colonels and contractors. I recognize a tell when I see one." The flicker of panic that crossed Karen's face was not faint. It was as obvious as a neon sign. Years later, I came to understand that this incident taught me a vital lesson about confronting bullies who misuse their official authority. They are only powerful as long as you don't understand the regulations better than they do. Record everything. research more thoroughly than they anticipate, and observe their collapse when you call their bluffs. The meeting concluded with Karen vowing to look into the matter more deeply and me vowing to examine all the documentation at my disposal. But we were both aware that this was merely the opening round of a conflict she had initiated without knowing her adversary's credentials. Walking home as the sky grew darker, I could smell the approaching rain over the mountains, that electric, ozonic scent that foretells a brewing storm. Something informed me that Karen's PowerPoint presentation was just the initial flash of lightning before the true thunder began. Karen did not take kindly to having her bluff exposed within a week. She had progressed from community theater to all-out conflict, and her initial tactic was to call in external reinforcement. The city inspector appeared on a dreary Tuesday morning, armed with a clipboard and the jaded look of a man who had refereed too many trivial disputes between neighbors. His name was Rodriguez, and he had the demeanor of someone who would prefer to be anywhere else. "I've received a complaint about dock safety infractions," he stated, avoiding eye contact. It was an anonymous tip. Anonymous, indeed. Karen's BMW was parked 3 houses away, offering a clear line of sight to my property, and I could make out her silhouette in the driver's seat. Phone held to her ear like some kind of suburban operative. Rodriguez dedicated 2 hours to measuring, photographing, and checking every bolt on my dock. The morning sun warmed the cedar planks beneath our feet, releasing that genuine wood aroma that served as a reminder of why I had developed such an affection for this place. Upon finishing, he simply shook his head. "Everything is compliant with code. In fact, it's better than code. The person who constructed this was highly skilled." He paused, casting a glance towards Karen's vehicle. "Just between us, Mr. Sterling, I receive a lot of these kinds of calls. It typically indicates someone has a personal grievance they're attempting to formalize." After he had gone, I discovered an envelope affixed to my front door. Inside was a petition. "Concerned residents request immediate action regarding unsafe watercraft," bearing precisely 7 signatures. Karen's elegant handwriting was at the top, followed by Derek's anxious scribble and 5 others I knew from her little coffee group. But the most revealing aspect was not who had signed it. It was the language used. Karen had labeled me a transient resident with temporary military benefits, who introduced an unstable element to our established community. The woman was all but advertising her biases in legalese. My phone began to ring later that afternoon. First it was Betty, then Phil Kosloff from 2 houses over, followed by Mrs. Patterson from the other side of the lake. Each of them had been visited by Karen, who had been asking probing questions about my history and whether they felt secure with my boat on the water. "She's telling people you're some sort of PTSD case," Betty informed me, her teacher's voice cutting and indignant. "She claims military personnel can be erratic and that your boat is likely a way to compensate for psychological problems." That evening, I sat on my back porch with a beer and my laptop, conducting a thorough search of public records. If Karen wanted to play the role of investigator, 2 could participate in that activity, and my findings were quite intriguing. Derek Whitmore, the aspiring city council member, had been channeling HOA maintenance funds to his brother's landscaping business. $18,000 over 2 years, all designated for emergency community improvements that, for some reason, were never finished. The invoices were matters of public record. Derek had submitted them for tax reasons. Even better, Karen's real estate license had 2 formal complaints lodged against it, one for misrepresenting property conditions and another for employing aggressive sales methods. While neither had led to a suspension, they collectively sketched a portrait of an individual who bent the rules to her advantage. Phil appeared at my door around 8 p.m., carrying 2 more beers and a serious expression. Phil is a contractor who has built half the docks on our lake, and he possesses the kind of practical sense that comes from 40 years of managing people's home renovation aspirations. "Karen visited my shop today," he said, making himself at home in Uncle Theodore's old rocking chair. "She wanted me to inspect your dock and find something faulty. When I informed her it was as solid as Gibraltar, she offered to compensate me for a more detailed assessment." The evening air was filled with the sound of water lapping against the shore, mingling with the far-off drone of a fishing boat's motor. Ordinary, peaceful lake noises that Karen was attempting to corrupt with her fabricated crisis. "There's something more," Phil added. "She's been inquiring about your uncle. She wants to know if he ever discussed property lines, water rights, Things of that nature. She became particularly interested when I mentioned that Theodore was always guarded about his legal matters. That night, I came to a decision that would alter the course of everything. If Karen was determined to investigate my past, I would delve into Theodore's legacy. The basement Betty had mentioned was beckoning to me, and I had a premonition that Uncle Theodore's secretive legal dealings might contain revelations that would make Karen's PowerPoint presentations seem like child's play. I had learned in the army that the most effective defense is often a more profound knowledge of the terrain. It was time to survey the territory that Karen was completely unaware even existed. The following morning carried the fragrance of rain on pine needles, along with the first tangible sign that this conflict was about to take a turn in ways Karen could not have foreseen. Karen's third move in her escalation strategy arrived with an attorney's letterhead and the type of legal intimidation that causes most individuals to capitulate quicker than a house of cards in a strong wind. The envelope was substantial, made of expensive paper, and brought by a courier who seemed to wish he were anywhere but our serene lake community. Notice of intent to pursue legal action was emblazoned across the top in bold Times New Roman font. Karen's lawyer, a downtown shark by the name of Bradley Finch, had composed 3 pages of dense legalese that demanded the prompt removal of my boat, along with damages for reduced property values and disturbance to the community. They were seeking $5,000 and a written commitment from me that I would never again dock a vessel larger than a canoe without prior HOA approval. I was perusing this work of art on my back porch when my phone rang. It was Emma, my daughter, calling from her senior year at Colorado State. "Dad, what on earth is happening up there?" Her voice had that familiar blend of worry and frustration I recalled from her adolescent years. Derek Whitmore's wife sent me a friend request on Facebook and then spent the next 20 minutes sending me messages about how concerned she is regarding your adjustment issues. That was the final straw. Targeting me was one matter, but involving my child in Karen's psychological games was another. The woman had just initiated an all-out war, oblivious to the fact that she was prodding a sleeping bear with military experience and an abundance of free time. "Emma, my dear, how would you feel about assisting your old man with a research endeavor?" 3 hours later, Emma showed up with her laptop, a container of Thai food, and the sort of resolute look she had inherited from her mother. We established a command center on the kitchen table, surrounded by takeout boxes that filled the cabin with the aroma of basil and chili peppers. "All right, Dad, I've been investigating Karen's social media, public records, and even her real estate client feedback. This woman has a discernible pattern." Emma displayed a spreadsheet that would have earned the approval of my former logistics sergeant. "She has a history of this. In 3 separate neighborhoods, she has consistently targeted single men or anyone she perceives as an outsider. However, the true treasure trove was located in Theodore's basement, and it took us until the stroke of midnight to unearth it. We sifted through countless boxes of documents, some of which dated back to the 1960s, all systematically arranged in Theodore's neat script. There were property surveys, tax receipts, correspondence with attorneys, and applications for water rights. The man had preserved everything. The major discovery occurred when Emma located a manila folder labeled Lake Acquisition 1962 to 1978 inch in Theodore's exact handwriting. Contained within were deeds, contracts, and payment stubs that narrated an astonishing tale. "Dad, you have to see this." Emma's voice was strained with anticipation. "Uncle Theodore didn't merely purchase lakefront land, he acquired the lake itself. Once you understood how to interpret them, the documents were perfectly clear. When the original developer went bankrupt in 1963, Theodore had discreetly bought not only his own cabin lot, but also every other parcel that came with water rights, deed by deed, year after year. He had consolidated ownership of the entire lakebed, the water column, and all navigational privileges. The legal phrasing was antiquated but left no room for ambiguity. All waters, improvements thereon, and exclusive navigation privileges in perpetuity. Theodore was the owner of every single drop of water that Karen persistently referred to as community property. "This is incredible," Emma said under her breath, comparing the deeds with current property maps. "Every other residence around the lake, they own up to the high water mark, but their deeds explicitly state that water rights are excluded. Those were already in Theodore's possession." My phone vibrated with a text message from Phil. "Karen has been getting quotes from contractors for significant dock construction. Rumor has it she's got something substantial planned for the spring." I showed the message to Emma, and she smiled with a kind of mischievous glee that reminded me precisely why she had been such a challenge as a teenager. Dad, she has absolutely no clue what she's getting herself into, does she? The next morning, I contacted Jennifer Patel, a property attorney whom Betty had suggested. She was an intelligent woman, incredibly sharp, and had managed numerous HOA conflicts. When I detailed our findings, the silence from her end was so prolonged that I thought the connection had been lost. Mr. Sterling, she finally said, I need to examine these documents right away. If your account is accurate, we are no longer dealing with a simple HOA violation case. We are discussing 30 years of trespassing on private land. That afternoon, as Jennifer went over Theodore's documents, I sat on my dock, listening to the gentle sound of water lapping against the pilings. My water, my lake, my 47 acres of immaculate mountain haven that Karen had been threatening to regulate for months. The situation was wonderfully ironic, but I had learned a crucial lesson from my years overseeing military supply lines. Information is only effective when you know precisely how and when to deploy it. Karen was still escalating her campaign, still issuing threats, and still digging herself deeper into a predicament she was completely unaware of. It was time to let her continue digging, while I orchestrated the ideal moment to reveal to her the true depth of that hole. Jennifer Patel contacted me at 7:30 the following morning, and I could sense the thrill in her voice, crackling over the phone like static electricity before a storm. Marcus, you're going to want to be sitting down for this. Her tone had that barely restrained excitement that lawyers get when they discover a case that could define their careers. I've been up all night with a property law expert, cross-referencing every single document from Theodore's collection with the current county records. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat in Uncle Theodore's old kitchen chair, the one that made the same creaking sound it had when I was a 12-year-old visiting for summer holidays. Your uncle was more than just eccentric, Jennifer went on. He was a master strategist. From 1962 to 1978, he methodically bought up every water rights parcel connected to this lake, not only for his own property, but for all of them. The morning light streamed in through my kitchen window, creating dancing shadows across Theodore's impeccably arranged legal files, which were spread out on my table. 40 years of meticulous planning detailed in manila folders and carbon-copied contracts. Here's the story. Jennifer laid it out. When Pinewood Development declared bankruptcy in 1963, they needed to sell off their assets quickly. While most investors were interested in the prime lakefront lots, Theodore saw a different opportunity. He acquired the water rights parcels, which were deemed worthless back then, for next to nothing. I could easily imagine him doing it. Theodore had always been the quirky one in the family, the one who collected stamps and constructed intricate model train sets in his garage. It turns out he was also discreetly amassing one of the most significant private water holdings in Colorado. Every property transaction that followed around the lake specifically omitted water rights, as they had already been sold to Theodore. The new owners received lovely lakefront houses, but the lake itself remained Theodore's private domain. The realization struck me with the force of a freight train loaded with irony. Karen had spent months threatening to dictate my use of community waters, when in reality, every drop of that water was legally mine. She had been standing on my dock, yelling at me about my boat in my lake, all while threatening to sue me for using my own property. Jennifer, what are the practical implications of all this? It means, she stated with clear relish, that every dock, every boat slip, every swimming area, and every fishing spot, they all are situated on your private land, existing only through your implicit consent and forbearance. The HOA has zero jurisdiction over any lake-related activities because the HOA does not own any portion of the lake. Through my window, I watched Karen's white BMW pull into her driveway. She emerged dressed in her power suit, likely on her way to another real estate meeting where she would portray herself as a community advocate safeguarding property values. If only she had any idea how profoundly mistaken she was about whose property she was attempting to safeguard. There's more, Jennifer added. Your uncle was apparently a low-key conservationist. He initiated the process for a conservation easement but never finalized it. This implies he intended to preserve the lake's natural condition while retaining legal ownership. The puzzle pieces were falling into place, revealing a picture I hadn't seen before: Theodore's modest way of life, his reputation as a recluse, his enigmatic sources of income. He had been quietly protecting a natural treasure, allowing the community to enjoy it on an informal basis. So, from a legal standpoint, I left the sentence unfinished. Legally, you could prohibit every boat, shut down every dock, and forbid anyone other than yourself from accessing the water today, this afternoon, right this instant. Jennifer paused for emphasis. Alternatively, you could employ this information in a more strategic manner. The coffee in my mug had grown cold, but it didn't matter. 30 years of community beliefs were on a collision course with 40 years of discreet legal preparation. Karen's cease and desist letters now seemed as insignificant as parking tickets issued by someone who didn't own the lot. Jennifer, I need to process this. Take all the time you need, Marcus, but keep in mind, knowledge is only power if you know how to wield it, and I have a feeling Karen isn't finished escalating things just yet. She was correct, of course. Karen had started a war with someone she assumed was just another retiree she could intimidate into compliance. She was oblivious to the fact that she had challenged the one individual who legally possessed everything she was trying to seize. It was time to see how far she would go before I revealed to her the spectacular scale of her miscalculation. The subsequent 48 hours were like the run-up to a military campaign. However, instead of managing logistics and supply lines, I was coordinating with lawyers, environmental experts, and a surprisingly resourceful group of disgruntled neighbors who had been anticipating for years the day someone would finally put Karen in her place. Jennifer showed up on Wednesday morning with backup. David Kim, an environmental attorney specializing in water rights, and Colonel Sarah Rodriguez, my former JAG officer colleague who had since retired to Denver and owed me one from our time in Kosovo. Sarah examined Theodore's documents and let out a low whistle. Sterling, your uncle just gave you the legal equivalent of a tactical nuclear device. The only question is, do you want to demolish the entire city or just oust one bothersome dictator? We laid everything out on my dining room table. Surveys, deeds, environmental assessments, and a mounting collection of evidence detailing Karen's increasingly frantic actions. The cabin was filled with the aroma of strong coffee and the kind of sharp focus that arises when intelligent people collaborate on a multifaceted issue. Here is our current assessment. Jennifer started, gesturing to a color-coded map David had created. Marcus has 100% ownership of the lake. The bed, the water column, navigational rights, the whole package. Every dock is there by his leave. Every boat is launched with his tacit approval. Every property owner on this lake has been, in effect, trespassing on his water for the past 30 years. David leaned in, his environmental knowledge bringing another layer to the situation. But here is the truly elegant part. Theodore's conservation studies indicate that this lake is in pristine condition. There's no pollution, no invasive species. It's a perfectly balanced ecosystem. Marcus could establish a conservation easement that would safeguard the environment while also preserving community access. Sarah, always the strategist, was already several steps ahead in her thinking. The issue is not what you are legally permitted to do, but what is practically advisable. Karen is escalating this because she believes she's in a typical neighbor conflict. It's time to demonstrate that she's been playing a simple game of checkers while you've inherited the entire chessboard. Emma had made the drive from college, armed with her laptop and that resolute expression she adopts when she sees someone being treated unfairly. She had been tracking Karen's social media activities, meticulously recording every falsehood and overstatement. Dad, check this out. She angled her screen towards us. Karen has been posting in regional HOA Facebook groups, portraying you as some sort of psychologically unstable veteran who is intimidating a tranquil community. She has 3 other HOA presidents lined up to testify about the risks of allowing military personnel to reside in residential neighborhoods. The sheer nastiness of it struck me like a physical blow. This was no longer about boat dimensions or community rules. It was about Karen's bigoted views against anyone who didn't conform to her restrictive definition of an acceptable neighbor. The woman had transformed her personal prejudices into a moral crusade and was enlisting allies who held the same distorted views. This actually works in our favor, Sarah noted with the dispassionate analysis of someone who had prosecuted war criminals. Discrimination on the basis of military status is a violation of federal fair housing regulations. She is not only mistaken about the property rights, but she is also committing civil rights violations. Phil came to the door around noon, bringing sandwiches from the local deli and a sobering report from his network of contractors. Karen's husband has secured permits for a significant dock expansion. He's talking about a boat lift that can accommodate a 40-foot yacht. It seems the size restrictions don't apply to those with the last name Whitmore. Betty followed an hour later with a homemade apple pie and the wisdom of 40 years in teaching, which had honed her ability to identify bullies and their supporters. She had been discreetly rallying the neighborhood opposition, and her intelligence-gathering capabilities would have made the CIA proud. 5 families are prepared to give statements about Karen's pattern of harassment, she announced. The Johnsons, the Patricks, old Mr. Henderson, the new couple in the blue house, and, surprisingly, the Williams family. Karen believed they were her staunchest allies. We dedicated the afternoon to outlining what Sarah termed our strategic disclosure plan. Phase 1. Allow Karen to continue her escalation while we meticulously documented every action. Phase 2. Unveil the truth about the property ownership at a moment of maximum effect. Phase 3. Establish a fair lake usage agreement that would shield everyone, except Karen, from any future mistreatment. The critical element, Jennifer clarified, is the timing. We need Karen to be fully invested in her legal threats before we reveal how baseless they are. Let her retain high-priced attorneys, submit formal complaints, perhaps even initiate actual legal proceedings. The more she deepens this hole for herself, the more dramatic her downfall will be. David was already composing a conservation easement that would offer permanent protection for the lake while also forming a community access agreement. This approach allows Marcus to retain ownership while ensuring reasonable usage rights for all current homeowners. Any future purchasers will have a clear understanding of what they are acquiring. Lakefront property with explicitly defined water access privileges. As the sun dipped below the horizon over my lake, and the thought that it was, in fact, my lake still gave me a small jolt of pleasure. I surveyed the group assembled around the table, this ad hoc council of war, a property lawyer, an environmental expert, a retired military prosecutor, my brilliant daughter, and a network of neighbors who had finally found a champion willing to confront a bully. We possessed superior intelligence, a stronger legal footing, and the kind of righteous indignation that arises from witnessing someone misuse authority they never legitimately held. Karen had no inkling of what was about to unfold, but she was on the verge of discovering that sometimes the unassuming neighbor you dismiss is the one holding all the power over what you're trying to seize. Karen's subsequent action had all the finesse of a hand grenade tossed into a library. She initiated an actual lawsuit. No longer just threats, but bona fide legal documents demanding the removal of my boat, $5,000 in damages, and a permanent injunction to stop me from disrupting community harmony with an oversized watercraft. Bradley Finch, her downtown shark of a lawyer, had composed a masterful piece of legal fantasy. According to his submission, my boat was creating navigational dangers in public waters, generating noise pollution during community quiet hours, and constituted a visual blight that was out of step with the established character of the neighborhood. The man had a talent for making a beautifully restored Chris-Craft sound like a derelict garbage barge. But the truly audacious part was concealed on page 4. They were asserting adverse possession rights to the lake itself, citing 30 years of uninterrupted community use. Karen was no longer merely trying to police my boat. She was attempting to legally expropriate my lake by exploiting a loophole that would have made a claim jumper from the Wild West feel a sense of pride. Emma discovered the filing online within hours of its being lodged. Dad, she's gone all out. This is no longer just neighborly harassment. This is an attempt to steal property valued at likely $2 million. The morning after the lawsuit papers were served, I awoke to discover sugar had been poured into my boat's fuel tank. It wasn't enough to completely ruin the engine, but it would have caused costly damage had I actually tried to start it. The sweet scent combined with the smell of gasoline created a sickening mixture that brought to mind the sabotage methods I had witnessed in Bosnia. Phil's security camera had captured an indistinct figure near my dock around 2 a.m., but the footage was too dark to make a definitive identification. Nevertheless, the person's gait seemed familiar. Derek's anxious amble was quite recognizable, even in low-resolution night vision. "This is moving beyond a simple property disagreement," Sarah commented when I informed her of the incident. "Vandalism alters the entire dynamic. You need to file a police report, get everything officially recorded, and view this as an advantage. They are now generating criminal evidence while we are preparing to dismantle their civil action." Detective Morrison from the county sheriff's office dedicated an hour to photographing the fuel tank, gathering samples, and recording my official statement. He displayed the weary competence of a man who had seen too many disputes between neighbors escalate into something ugly. However, the detail about the sugar seemed to capture his attention. "It's an interesting thing about sabotaging a fuel system," he remarked, tightening the fuel cap. "Most people are unaware that sugar doesn't actually dissolve in gasoline. It forms a syrupy substance that will clog up fuel lines and injectors. The person who did this knew exactly what they were aiming for." That afternoon, Karen shifted her tactics from vandalism to a full-blown assault on my character. She had persuaded Channel 9 News to broadcast a segment on HOA fighting military intimidation, which featured dramatic shots of my boat taken from angles that made it look like a warship menacing a tranquil pond. The reporter, an eager young man named Blake Morrison, had evidently accepted Karen's version of events without question. Residents of this peaceful lakefront community claim they are living in fear of reprisal from a former soldier who is unwilling to adhere to fundamental community rules. He declared in the urgent tone local news channels reserved for stories about lost pets. They interviewed Karen on her immaculate dock. She was dressed in a white sundress that seemed to radiate against the dark water behind her. "We are simply trying to preserve the serene atmosphere that drew all of us to this unique place," she stated, with a display of wounded virtue that could have earned her an Emmy if acting offered better financial rewards than real estate. But Karen made a critical error in her media approach. In every interview, she repeatedly mentioned our community lake and shared waters. Each time she used those terms, she was inadvertently creating a record of her belief that the lake was public property. A record that would appear rather foolish once Jennifer disclosed the true ownership details. Emma had been tracking the public's response to the news report on social media, and the comments section was fiercely divided. Half of the audience was buying into Karen's portrayal as the victim, but the other half had clearly encountered similar HOA despots and were strongly on my side. "Look at this one, Dad," Emma said, scrolling through the Facebook comments. "I hope this veteran tells that HOA which exactly where to stick her boat rules. These people have no clue what real problems are." This comment had garnered 3,000 likes. Phil came by that evening with two pieces of information that significantly improved my day. First, his network of contractors had learned that Derek's permits for the dock expansion were based on falsified property lines. He had somehow managed to persuade the city that his property extended 10 feet further into the lake than it actually did. Second, and more importantly, Karen had been looking at lakefront properties in Durango, large, expensive estates with private lake access and no HOA regulations. The woman was already formulating her exit plan while simultaneously trying to ruin mine. "She's starting to panic?" Phil noted, getting comfortable in Theodore's old porch rocker with a beer. "All this legal posturing, the media blitz, the act of vandalism. It's the conduct of someone who feels they are losing their grip and can't figure out why." That night, I sat on my dock, listening to the gentle lapping of water against the pilings and observing the lights flicker on in the houses dotted around the shoreline. Tomorrow, Karen would likely escalate her campaign even further. More legal actions, more media appearances, perhaps additional acts of sabotage. She was descending into a state of complete desperation, and desperate individuals are prone to making catastrophic errors. From a purely tactical perspective, I almost pitied her. Karen had initiated a conflict without first surveying the terrain, and she was on the verge of learning that sometimes the unassuming neighbor you misjudge is the one who holds all the cards you believed were in your own hand. Karen's final, desperate maneuver arrived in an envelope bearing the official HOA letterhead, phrased in the kind of legal jargon that signals a last-ditch effort from someone who has already accepted defeat. She was convening an emergency board meeting, complete with a hired court reporter, her high-priced downtown lawyer, and enough dramatic setup to rival a Broadway production. The summons was delivered by certified mail on a Friday, requiring my presence at a formal disciplinary hearing the following Tuesday. The notice stated that I was accused of willful violation of community covenants, harassment of board members, and, my personal favorite, conduct unbecoming a community resident. Emma burst out laughing so hard upon reading that last charge that she almost choked on her coffee. Conduct unbecoming? What does she think this is, a court-martial? Did she actually just attempt to use military disciplinary terms against a real veteran? But the true comedic gem was concealed within the meeting's agenda. Karen had extended invitations to City Councilman Patrick Hayes, County Commissioner Linda Rodriguez, and that go-getting reporter Blake Morrison to be present for her accountability demonstration. Her intention was to publicly disgrace me in front of local dignitaries and the press, apparently oblivious to the fact that she was about to trigger the most significant legal bombshell in Colorado's history. The attempt at bribery occurred on Sunday evening, carried out by Karen's most devoted follower, a jittery real estate agent named Cheryl, who had evidently been unlucky enough to be assigned this particular task. She appeared at my door at 8:00 p.m., clutching an envelope and wearing the expression of someone being compelled to handle a venomous snake. "Marcus?" she began haltingly. "Karen asked me to deliver this to you. It's a proposal for a settlement. She's prepared to drop the entire matter if you will simply agree to move your boat to another location. There's even a financial incentive." Inside the envelope was a cashier's check for $5,000 and a pre-drafted contract that would have prohibited me from mooring any vessel longer than 20 feet in community waters. The agreement also contained a non-disclosure provision that would have barred me from talking about the settlement talks with other residents. I glanced at Cheryl, who was perspiring despite the crisp mountain evening. "Please inform Karen that I am grateful for the offer, but I'm afraid I cannot accept it." She anticipated you might say that. Cheryl's voice dropped to a near whisper. "She also instructed me to tell you that challenging the establishment never turns out well for anyone." That was a revealing remark. Karen was now threatening to leverage her husband's political ties to complicate my life through official means. It was a pity she didn't grasp that menacing a property owner with governmental retaliation opens up an entirely new realm of legal complications. Monday brought the revelation that Karen had managed to get the state environmental agency to look into possible lake pollution from boat fuel systems. An anonymous source, I wonder who that could have been, had reported unusual smells and a potential petroleum leak originating from the area around my dock. The inspector who arrived was a capable woman by the name of Dr. Sarah Jamie, who took her duties seriously and clearly had no patience for having her time consumed by transparently motivated complaints. She dedicated 2 hours to collecting water samples, photographing my boat's fuel systems, and meticulously documenting the immaculate state of everything she inspected. "Mr. Sterling," she remarked as she put away her testing gear, "I've been in this line of work for 15 years, and this is one of the most well-maintained private docks I have ever come across. The individual who submitted this complaint was either severely misinformed or acting with deliberate malice." Her findings would be entered into the official record, serving as another piece of evidence that demonstrated Karen's habit of lodging baseless accusations to harass someone she could not control through proper channels. That evening, Phil delivered some unsettling news from his network of contractors. Derek had been discreetly gathering quotes for substantial dock alterations that would necessitate the removal of a portion of my property's natural shoreline barrier. The schematics revealed a boat lift designed for a 40-foot yacht, along with a floating dock system that would stretch 50 feet out into the lake. "The permits are illegitimate," Phil stated, laying the blueprints out on my kitchen table. "They assert that the construction is taking place on the Whitmore property, but take a look at these coordinates. Half of this project would be situated on your land, and about 30 feet of it would extend into areas where Derek has no legal claim whatsoever." Betty showed up with apple turnovers and fresh intelligence from her circle of retired teachers, who had transformed their neighborhood watch into a highly efficient operation. Karen has been calling every contractor in a 3-county area, attempting to find someone who will testify that your boat is hazardous. When that failed, she began offering cash for expert opinions on navigational risks. The strategy was evident. Karen had progressed from harassment to fraud, then to bribery, and finally to filing a false environmental report. She was methodically breaking multiple state and federal laws in her effort to seize property valued at millions of dollars. All because she was incapable of accepting that someone had simply said no to her. Tuesday morning broke with a crisp, clear sky and that sharp mountain air that seems to bring everything into sharper focus. I could hear Karen's voice carrying across the water as she orchestrated the preparations for her accountability demonstration, arranging cameras and chairs with the meticulousness of a prosecutor getting ready for a capital punishment case. What she was unaware of was that Jennifer, Sarah, and David were already positioned, equipped with 40 years of legal proof and a revelation about property ownership that was about to transform her theatrical spectacle into the most stunning public downfall in the history of HOAs. The sound of cars pulling up to the community center mingled with the soft lapping of water against my dock. My dock on my lake, where Karen had been trespassing each time she came to threaten me for breaking rules she had no right to enforce. It was time to show her exactly how profoundly she had misjudged the situation. The community center was charged with the kind of electric atmosphere that precedes a spectacular personal implosion. Karen had converted the humble meeting space into her own private tribunal, complete with a stenographer's desk, professional-grade lighting for the news crew, and enough folding chairs to seat what appeared to be half the county. She had taken her place behind the HOA board table as if she were a judge, with her high-priced lawyer, Bradley Finch, and Derek, who was fidgeting with his tie, flanking her. City Councilman Hayes and Commissioner Rodriguez were seated in the front row, both displaying the stoic patience of public officials attending to campaign obligations they would rather have avoided. The turnout was far greater than anyone had anticipated. The news had circulated through Phil's network of contractors, Betty's teacher mafia, and Emma's social media efforts. 43 individuals were crammed into a room meant for 20, forming a solid wall of observers that would ensure Karen's disgrace was utterly memorable. I entered precisely at 7 o'clock, with Jennifer, Sarah, and David beside me, resembling a legal special operations team. Jennifer was holding a leather briefcase that housed 40 years of Theodore's impeccably arranged files, while Sarah carried a manila folder so thick it could have stopped a bullet. Karen's smile was radiant enough to illuminate the entire room. "Mr. Sterling, thank you for at last attending this long-overdue session on accountability." Her voice was laced with the syrupy condescension she employed when she believed she was in complete control. Blake Morrison adjusted his camera to get the ideal shot as Karen began her scripted speech about community standards and mutual responsibilities. She had clearly practiced this presentation, making grand gestures towards enlarged photographs of my boat that made it look like the USS Missouri menacing a small pond. "Ladies and gentlemen," Karen declared, her real estate training showing in every rehearsed movement, "we are convened to deal with a matter that jeopardizes the fundamental nature of our tranquil lakeside community. Mr. Sterling has consistently disregarded our size regulations, flouted our aesthetic principles, and, when addressed about these justifiable concerns, has met them with harassment and threats." Bradley Finch then rose to lay out their legal arguments, accompanied by a PowerPoint presentation that seemed more suited for a courtroom than a community hall. Property values, navigational risks, complaints about noise pollution. He had constructed a formidable case, all based on the flawed premise that Karen possessed any legal power over activities on the lake, the defendant's vessel. Finch intoned with judicial seriousness, "is a flagrant breach of established community standards that regulate our shared water resources. We insist on its immediate removal, financial compensation for the disruption to the community, and a permanent injunction to prevent any future similar offenses." The audience grew uneasy. The proceedings felt more like a modern-day witch hunt than a simple neighborhood disagreement, and several people were already looking visibly uncomfortable with Karen's prosecutorial display. Then, it was my opportunity to speak. I rose to my feet deliberately, in the manner I had learned to command respect during military briefings, and gave a respectful nod to the city officials and the news camera. "Thank you, Councilman Hayes, Commissioner Rodriguez, and members of the community. I am grateful to everyone for dedicating their evening to this significant matter." Jennifer opened her briefcase with a dramatic flair that mirrored Karen's own performance. "However, before we delve into boat regulations, there is a piece of information everyone here ought to be aware of." Karen's smile wavered for a moment, but she was too deep into her performance to deviate now. "Ms. Whitmore has devoted a great deal of time to discussing community standards for shared water resources." I went on, taking a substantial folder from Jennifer. "But there is a critical flaw in her entire position." The room fell into a profound silence, broken only by the sound of Blake Morrison's camera documenting every second. "This lake is not a shared resource." I spread out David's color-coded survey map, the one that illustrated property lines with devastating clarity. "I am the owner, every single drop, every square inch of the water, the lakebed, and all navigational rights belong to me." The silence was so absolute that the building's heating and ventilation system became audible. Karen's complexion shifted from a confident pink to a doubtful pale. and then to a horrified white in the span of about 3 seconds. "What you are all looking at," Jennifer declared, rising to speak to the assembly like a professor giving a lecture, "is 40 years of legal records that prove Marcus Sterling inherited full and complete ownership of this 47-acre lake from his uncle, Theodore Sterling." She displayed the original 1962 deed, Theodore's systematic land purchases, and the water rights certificates that were older than every single house around the shoreline. Every dock, every boat slip, and every swimming area is situated on Mr. Sterling's private land. Existing through his forbearance and consent, Karen managed to find her voice, though it emerged as little more than a strangled sound. "That's not possible. This is community water. We've been using it for 30 years. By the grace and informal consent of Theodore Sterling," Sarah cut in with prosecutorial sharpness. "A consent that was never formally legalized and can be withdrawn at any moment." Bradley Finch had the expression of a man who had just realized he had been arguing a case that would lead to a malpractice suit. His high-priced lawsuit was not merely incorrect. It was spectacularly, humiliatingly, and career-ruiningly incorrect. He was in the process of suing a lake owner for using his own lake. Blake Morrison's camera perfectly captured Karen's face as the full weight of the situation dawned on her. Every rule she had attempted to impose, every threat she had issued, every violation notice she had dispatched, all of it was predicated on an authority she never had over property she did not own. "So when you came onto my dock demanding that I remove my boat from community waters," I stated with the serene satisfaction that comes from holding a winning hand, "you were, in fact, trespassing on my property to threaten me about the use of my own lake." Commissioner Rodriguez leaned in, her political acumen sensing a catastrophe in the making. "Mr. Sterling, what are the implications of this for the community?" "It means," I answered, looking straight at Karen's stunned expression, "that I could, by law, forbid every boat, remove every dock, and deny all access to the water to anyone other than myself. Today, right this instant, this very moment." The collective gasp from the crowd was like the sound of a strong wind moving through pine trees. "But I will not do that," I added, observing the wave of relief that spread through the room, "because, unlike some individuals, I value being a good neighbor." Karen's humiliation was total, recorded in high definition by Blake Morrison's camera and observed by what seemed like half the county. She had picked a fight with the person who owned everything she was trying to seize. Wielding an authority she never had to police property that belonged to her intended victim, the woman who had spent months labeling me a troublemaker had just been exposed as the one who was trespassing on private land to harass the rightful owner. Game, set, match. The community center cleared out with the murmur of people who had just seen something they would be discussing for a long time. Karen remained motionless at the board table, gazing at Jennifer's legal papers as if she were trying to decode her own obituary, while Bradley Finch was packing his briefcase with gestures that shouted career-ending malpractice suit. Derek came over with the anxious gait of a man whose entire life had just collapsed. "Marcus, we Karen always if we had known." He couldn't complete the thought, likely tallying up the legal costs in his mind. "Derek, we're neighbors," I said, extending my hand. "This doesn't need to ruin anyone who is open to being reasonable." Karen submitted her resignation by email within 24 hours and had a for sale sign up so fast that Phil barely had time to say, "Good riddance." Betty was victorious in the emergency HOA election, running on a platform of treating people like actual human beings rather than walking rule violations, and her first official act was to offer me a formal apology on behalf of the community. But the truly remarkable part was what followed. The Theodore Sterling Memorial Conservation Fund was established that spring, and seeing Emma award the first scholarships to students of environmental law brought tears to my eyes. Uncle Theodore's understated brilliance was at last receiving the acknowledgement it merited. By supporting the next wave of individuals who would safeguard places just like our lake, Phil started organizing monthly cleanup events that evolved into community-wide festivities. Families enjoying picnics on the shoreline, children learning to fish from the docks, and couples enjoying sunsets from the water. Exactly the scene Theodore had pictured when he spent 40 years quietly preserving this small slice of heaven. The yearly Veterans Fishing Competition became a celebrated event, attracting contestants from 5 different states and generating thousands of dollars for veteran assistance programs. The smell of grilled hamburgers filled the pine-scented air every August as old soldiers exchanged stories, and showed the younger generation the proper way to cast a line. Jennifer's pro bono HOA clinic went on to assist dozens of homeowners in similar predicaments throughout Colorado. Her guiding principle, which she adopted from my Army days, became the standard for property owners. Understand your rights before someone else claims to own them. She consistently used Theodore's story as a prime example in all her talks about the importance of thorough legal research. Blake Morrison received a regional journalism prize for his follow-up series on community recovery, and the lake itself became a subject of study in environmental law programs. Students would visit each semester to learn how private ownership, when directed by wisdom rather than avarice, can serve to protect public resources. 6 months later, I was watching the sunset turn the water to gold when Emma called with news that brought Uncle Theodore's legacy full circle. The state had officially recognized our lake as a model conservation area, ensuring its permanent protection from development while still allowing for community use. "Dad," she said, "do you know what the best part is?" Karen attempted to get on the HOA board in her new neighborhood, but someone there had seen the news reports. They voted against her unanimously. The loons were calling to each other across the water, which would never again be at the mercy of petty despots. Their calls blended with the sounds of children's laughter as they swam near Betty's dock. The evening air was filled with the scent of barbecue and the feeling of contentment from a community that had discovered how to value what it possessed instead of trying to dominate what it could not. Occasionally, justice is not about retribution. It's about creating something so wonderful that the individuals who attempted to ruin it become mere insignificant details in a far superior narrative. Every evening, I sit on my dock with a cup of coffee that has the taste of victory, observing families enjoying the water that has been safeguarded for 60 years and will be treasured for 60 more. Uncle Theodore's quiet foresight had brought into being something that Karen's small-minded authoritarianism never could. A genuine community founded on mutual respect rather than fear. That is the outcome when bullies challenge individuals who are familiar with the actual rules, not just the ones they invent. Please share your own HOA horror stories in the comments. We read each and every one, and your own nightmare could be the focus of our next episode. Subscribe to End for HOA for weekly stories of neighborhood tyrants receiving their just desserts. And be sure to hit that notification bell, because next week we will be covering the HOA that tried to take away a disabled veteran service dog. Believe me, you will be astonished at how spectacularly that backfired. You have been watching End for HOA, where self-entitled Karens receive a dose of reality. If this episode brought you feelings of secondhand anger or satisfaction, please hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you'll be the first to know about more weekly HOA mayhem from us.